This is A Rational Fear.
Well, as the US election wraps up all over Australia, political junkies are turning their eyes backward to Australia to see what's happening here. As the Albopalooza wraps up, which is the lacklustre festival that has been going on for the last 3 years, this parliament's kind of been noted for not doing too much. But something that is interesting is that this parliamentary period that we've all lived through has had quite an extraordinary thing in it. That is the crossbench. Labor holds the balance of power in the lower house just by one seat. And while technically the Liberal Party is in opposition, their coalition with the Nationals mean that they're moving further and further to the right, and they've kind of abandoned the centre of the political spectrum. But as luck would have it, there are all these crossbench who are independent and they have a real effect on policy. And one of those that sits on the crossbench is our guest today. It is the member for North Sydney, Kylea Tink. But as luck would have it, the AEC has decided that due to changes in population in the area and the surrounds, that the electorate of North Sydney is going to be vaporised. It's going to disappear. So Kylea Tink is soon to be on the out. Or is she? Kylea Tink, this is your exit interview because there is no HR in Parliament House. I will play the part of HR in this case. Welcome. And the first question is, how much stationery have you stolen?
Oh, Dan. Firstly, thank you for having me today and for offering me this opportunity as an exit interview, because I think it's important for professional development to have that opportunity for a two-way flow of information. I am going to say I have not personally acquired any stationery from the electorate office. I think, in some instances, we're probably still using some of the oldest technology on the face of the planet when it comes to running Parliament. So there's probably not a lot here you'd want to take.
Well, I'm very thankful you agreed to do a podcast and not do an interview via fax machine, which I don't have. But I'm sure you have a fax machine.
We do have a fax machine. We have a mail machine too, and a mail folding machine. So, yeah, it's pretty extraordinary working as a parliamentarian. I'm part of one of the biggest businesses in our country, yet the truth of the matter is that from a operational side of things, it's a long way behind best in class when it comes to corporate entities or something like irrational fear.
All right, mate. We know you're on the way out, but there's no need to denigrate the business. Thanks very much. Well, first of all, for an exit interview, the things we need to get across straight away is what were some of the most positive experiences you had working in Parliament House?
There's been a whole heap of upside in terms of having the last 2.5 years in Parliament as the representative for North Sydney. Not the least of those has been the people that I've been able to work with. And I want to give a massive shout out to the other people that are currently on the crossbench in particular, because they are quite an extraordinary group of human beings who are very determined to try and push for change across our parliamentary environment. I think also working with my community more broadly to re-engage in our democracy, to make sure that the North Sydney voice that was being heard in Canberra was actually a voice that was coming from the people, has been really, really positive. And I think the wins that we've been able to secure, whether it has been the improvement in our climate policies, whether it's been improvement in gender equality, raising awareness around human rights and, looking at integrity and actual behaviour in politics, they've all been really positive experiences.
All right. Spill the tea. Come on. What are some of the negative experiences you've had at Parliament House?
Oh, look, honestly, I wish I could send every single Australian to Parliament to spend time in it for a period of time, because I think it's what we're lacking. This environment is not like any work environment I have ever experienced.
What you're saying is mandatory service.
I'm hearing
mandatory service as a parliamentarian. Every Australian must spend 3 months every year.
100%. Actually, and I think that would be really, really useful, not only for people to understand what's going on in politics, but for politics itself. I think we'd be getting better political outcomes, because there is no doubt in my mind that this system at the moment is geared to work to the benefit of a party structure and two major party structures. And there's this massive disconnect between what I think of as being representation, which is representation for the people you're sent to speak for, versus I honestly have come to understand that those that are voted there under a party banner see it as their primary job to represent the party. And that is a real problem when we have parties that are geared predominantly to win the next election. That's what they're focused on. It's a 3-year short-term cycle. So it's no wonder that we are in all power of trouble in so many issues. The parties just aren't thinking long-term.
Because North Sydney is effectively being abolished, does this mean you are like in full-on schoolies mode, like full-on mark-up day mode for you, for Kylea Tink? Are you just trying to get as much fun stuff done, as much as you can as an independent, before the end of term?
Look, I think there's a couple of things. Most definitely, it's made it really real for me that I've only got, at most 6 months to try and fight for the changes that I wanted to get done. But actually, the other thing is it's kind of let me out of my box, because previously being able to advocate for North Sydney has been a really cool thing to be able to do. But now the question for me is, what do I do next? They couldn't beat me, so they've had to abolish me. But that just means I can look at other avenues now, whether that's running for another community or maybe even heading to the Senate, where I could be an even bigger challenge for the party system.
Whoa. What, are you just dropping 2 bits of news here, Kylie? What's going on here? Which local area are you going to run for? And are you going to run for the Senate?
Look, I don't know. I'm still keeping my options open, Dan. What I can tell you, and I think this has been actually really wonderful, is there's a number of communities that have actually reached out to me to ask me if I would move to actually represent them. So
really?
Yeah.
Who's knocking on Kylie's door?
Oh, some really beautiful spots, actually. Some coastal regions, a bit of regional and rural New South Wales action. But, seriously, I think what that says is that there are plenty of communities out there that want people like me representing them. And so in my own immediate environment, I now live in Bradfield. So, we have in Bradfield a really strong independent candidate, Nicolette Buller, who ran in 2022 and only just lost. I'm not into cannibalising the movement. So, but Bennelong takes out part of North Sydney going forward, and I hear Berowra is looking for an independent, possibly up in that beautiful, Hunter region, so Hawkesbury River region.
What we're hearing is a potential move west, a potential move north. Yeah. I do remember seeing ads for folks who are willing to put their hand up to be an independent candidate in Berowra. So that sounds interesting. You said it's a beautiful region that is attracting you, and a coastal region. Berowra is very watery. The Hawkesbury's in there. Are you moving into Berowra?
I think at this point in time, I'm still just looking at how I can best help the maximum number of communities get independent representation at the next election. And Dan, there's a lesson that I've learned in 2.5 years is how to talk like a politician. So
you've done really well.
Directly and really dodge.
I mean, you've got the Berowra Waters Inn. They've got 2 hats, the Berowra Waters Inn. It's an amazing restaurant, Italian restaurant there at the Punt. And it's not that far from North Sydney. Like, the kids schooling, that's not too far for them to travel still. It's great. They won't mind moving to Berowra, I'm sure.
I'm sure they wouldn't mind. What I do know about my kids is that I think they've had this really unique experience to see how our country works. And I think they are really frustrated that more young voices aren't heard in Parliament. So they're happy to see me keep swinging.
Well, I want to know, how has the media at large misunderstood your role in Parliament, do you think?
I can actually say managing the negative media and the really toxic media has been one of the toughest parts of this job. They get really personal, and it's really opened my eyes to the fact that we are missing true independent journalism in this country, and so many of what are currently considered, our national news sheets. And I think it's a real problem.
On Sky News, did Andrew Bolt ever complain that you can't even spell Kylea correct? Is that?
Oh, look, I think my mum and dad who live out in northwest New South Wales, it wouldn't be a night watching Sky without Andrew having a go at me. So
they must be so proud that you're on the telly all the time.
So proud. It makes my dad. I think Dad hasn't had as much foot traffic into his small business in Coona for a long time. People showing up to complain about me. But I think between Sky, The Australian, The Daily Telegraph, I'm happy to call it out. These publications have a vested interest in how they report, and they're not actually interested in understanding who we are or what people like myself stand for. They just see us as a threat, and as a consequence, they'll come at you whatever direction they think they can.
So that was a really challenging part to deal with. Were there any other extremely challenging parts of the culture at Parliament House that you thought needed improving upon?
Yeah, look, I do think that it is still a very misogynistic environment. There are men that are involved in politics who do not think someone like me has any place there. You know, I'm female, I'm compassionate, I have a family. And there are people in that environment, I think, who would be far happier to see it continue to be dominated by stale, male, pale kind of gents.
I don't know. Barnaby Joyce has more families than many other politicians. So, I don't know what you're saying there, Kylie.
Look, I think, Barnaby's an interesting character actually, because as you said, he's got more families than me, that's for sure. But he keeps getting returned by his electorate, which I think that for me says a lot about where we're at as a society and whether people have actually gotten their heads around the fact that when you vote, the opportunity is to send somebody who speaks for you on the issues that matter to you versus just falling in line behind old, party lines.
I want to know about the hours at Parliament House because you're an independent MP. You don't have the same resources as a Labor or a Liberal Party or a National Party. And in many ways, you've got to do your own thinking. Can you talk about a little bit about that? Like, how does your office work differently to a Labor office or a Liberal office?
Yeah. And actually, Dan, it's a really good point. It's actually one of the most significant differences and it's one of the hardest things to overcome because every piece of legislation that's introduced in the House is read by myself or my team.
Oh my God, that sounds so boring.
We will assess it. Well, you know what it meant? There's something like 300 pieces of legislation has been brought in by this government in this term. And what I find fascinating, so firstly, you asked me about the days. Every day in Parliament actually feels like 3. Because you have your morning session, your midday session and your evening session. You have to be in the House most days by 7:30 in the morning and you actually can't leave until 7 o'clock at night. So they're pretty much 12-hour days for the time you're down there. And there is no lunch. There's no morning tea or afternoon tea. The business carries through the entire length of the day. But I think the single biggest observation for me is the number of times I will go into a division, which is when the bells ring, so I'm called to vote. And my colleagues in the major parties won't even know why they're there. They won't know what piece of legislation they've been called to vote on. All they know is that they've received a message from their party whip saying, get to the chamber, we need the numbers and you're voting yes or no. And so being the sort of person I am, it's been quite fun on occasion to turn to the person sitting opposite me, maybe voting against something I'm voting for, to say, do you know what you're voting against? I've literally sat in votes where the opposition has sat opposite me and voted for higher small business taxes, or, I've sat opposite Labor when I've been voting for greater human rights protections and the major parties will vote against me. And I'm like, do you guys even think about where you're sitting on these votes? It's a real shame that there isn't more active participation in the legislative review process from all members of the House, because I think that would actually encourage a far more robust debate.
My bedside table, I've got several unread books. I can't imagine the amount of policy papers you have on your bedside table that you haven't read yet. But of course you would have, because you're a diligent person. I'm sure you would have read it.
Yeah, I'm a Virgo, eldest child.
How do you get through all of that legislation? How do you actually coach yourself to get through that job, that part of the job?
When I said yes to running for my community, I took that responsibility really seriously. And so I just joked about, being an eldest child, but actually I see it as something I told my community I would do. And it has been so hard, Dan. I'm exhausted. I don't know how politicians who've been in this game for 24 years do it, because it does feel like it's 7 days a week, 365 days a year. And the amount of information you have to get your head around. I thought my brain was full until I took this job. And now, I have days where 1 minute I'll be talking about carbon emissions in petrol, and next I'll be talking about the policy behind child payments, and then I'll be talking about banking laws, and it all happens within the space of 4 hours. The human brain's a pretty amazing thing, and I think if you direct it in the right way, if you decide where you're going to apply it, you can achieve extraordinary things. But yeah, it's a really tough gig being an independent.
Which means I have to ask the question, why would you move to Berowra to do it all again?
Because I believe our country deserves better, honestly. I think, Dan, it's so fascinating for me because I just can't get over this idea that the best form of parliament in this country is a parliament where the people who show up are there to represent the communities that they've been sent by. I really fundamentally believe that. Whereas, I literally, quite a senior person in the Nationals actually, was speaking to my father out in Coonabarabran recently. He's an ex-leader of the Nationals Party, and he was lamenting the existence of someone like me in politics. And my dad sort of said to him, but she's there for her community. Isn't that what you do? And this guy turned to him and said, no, when I went because people voted me to go down for my party. Like, I represented my party. And I just think that is the tension to me in our democracy at the moment. And because the parties have dominated for so long, they have effectively reset the system so it is party-centric. I don't think party-centric politics is going to bring us to the best place we can be as a nation. So I think it needs more people like me turning up, prepared to say we need to fix this. And because it's not just going to take one term, unfortunately. I wish I could have fixed it in 3 years. I haven't been able to. I think it takes a lot more people and a lot more time.
Well, let's play the hits. As you're leaving, and this is your exit interview, what are you most proud of? What are the 3 things that you are exceedingly proud of that you've achieved for your community?
I'm exceedingly proud of the advances in climate policy, the 43% as a floor, not a ceiling. And actually, my private personal hit is the introduction of fuel efficiency standards in Australia. That as a mechanic's daughter.
It's such a boring discussion, but it's so important because transport is the second largest problem when it comes to carbon emissions in Australia.
It is, and 25 years we've been trying to get those emissions standards in, and neither party has been able to do it. What changed in this parliament? It was the largest crossbench in the history of our nation, and we managed to get it done. So I'm incredibly proud of that. I am incredibly proud of the fact that we do have a behaviour code now for parliament that has been endorsed by both the major parties, and that will be used as the basis to start to hold parliamentarians responsible for their behaviour. Again, something that has been discussed for decades and decades and was unable to get done. But I helped write that sucker, and it's now there. And I'm incredibly proud of the work around speaking out for gender balance in terms of the recognition that it takes all sorts of people in an environment to get the best outcomes. And, the reinstatement, for example, of the single parent payment to your youngest child is 14 from 8, that was a massive win, I think, because it says we need to make sure that every Australian can participate in the workforce in the way they want to.
It sounds like a really big list of achievements, and you should be very proud of those. Mainstream media would say, well, what effect does this crossbench have on any kind of policy? So what is the answer to that question? When you see Sky News go, these are just people taking up space, this might have been passed anyway. Are you in the documents? Are you shifting policy? Are you changing where the commas are and moving the definitions around?
To me, it's less about the commas and it is more about the substance of the legislation. And I think what we have seen in this term of Parliament is an environment where sometimes bad legislation is brought to the House by a government. And because people like myself have an approach of we can't stop it, but we can fix it, we work with them to make it better. And so the end result is a better outcome, whether it was, the industrial relations law, recognising when Tony Burke was trying to make those changes, and I had a really direct conversation with him about the impact that would have on recruitment agencies trying to do temps. And he was kind of like, I hadn't even thought about that. Yeah, we need to change that to make that better. That's the sort of politics you get from an active crossbench. It makes it better. Whereas the problem is the opposition just says no. And they don't engage, they don't try and make it better. So you just end up with crud policy if it's just the two parties beefing each other each time.
Can you identify things that you've brought in your toolkit from your previous roles in kind of corporate Australia to the job? Has there been an interesting thing you're like, I didn't think I'd kind of, approach it this way given where we are, but here we are. I'm using the same old tools that I've been using.
Yeah, I think the community listening tools. I mean, Dan, as you know, a big part of my life has been the not-for-profit space and building movements, whether it's the McGrath Foundation or Camp Quality or getting kids out of immigration detention. People might be surprised to hear this, but that's not something that government does very well at that political level. They kind of get an idea in their head and then they just decide to pursue it.
Right.
So it's actually been
I can't tell you the amount of people who are just crying out for nuclear power in their neighbourhood. Why isn't there nuclear power in our neighbourhood?
To me, that is that is the disconnect of this environment. So I didn't expect to use that skill as much as what I have, but it's been incredibly powerful because I've even been able to, walk next to the Prime Minister coming out of a chamber and go, hey, PM, actually my community really wants to understand this and this and this. Could you maybe answer that question for them next time? And they listen. It's like this is new information for them. So, and I think the actual engagement of people in democracy. So things like, don't just yell at me. Tell me what you want me to do differently. If you're don't complain, do something about it. Tell me what you want me to do about it.
It was interesting to see just how this government holds the crossbench close. And they want to be friends with the crossbench for obvious reasons because that's their way of getting stuff through. But I was at a dinner recently for the Screen Producers Association down in Canberra, and Zali was there and a couple of other independents were there as well. And it struck me that when Tony Burke was talking about screen quotas and legislation that he kind of brought up the independents in the room saying, and we need these people, these independents in the room to get this done. That's why they're at this dinner. And I thought, well, that's kind of interesting. Like there seemed to be not just out of need to kind of celebrate the independents, but a fondness for the independents. Do you get that from Labor at all, or am I just making that up?
I think fondness might be going a bit far.
Going too far.
I think, it might be going a little bit too far. Look, I think what I would say is there's mutual respect.
Uh-huh.
So as I said, people like myself and Zali and Zoe and Mon and Sophie and Allegra, we don't waste their time, I guess. So I think what I have particularly appreciated is that when I've had an issue that I've taken up with the minister, they've paid me the respect of listening to me, knowing that I'm not coming with an agenda to take their job. I'm honestly there to speak for a group of people who are speaking through me. So I think that I would say it's mutual respect. We also terrify them. I think that is true because, just as there was the rise of people like myself in 2022 off in action by the coalition on climate, the truth of the matter is, we may have got better, but better is still not good enough when it's come to how far this government's been prepared to take us. So, someone asked me the other day how many seats I thought were at risk in the next election. As far as I'm concerned, 151 seats, are up for the taking by an independent because what we're seeing is that we didn't get what we wanted out of the 22 election in terms of that rapid uptake of change, particularly in the climate space. And Labor needs to be told in no uncertain terms they need to do better. And if that means we need a couple of the Labor seats to turn independent, then I think that would be a good outcome for our community.
In terms of, then there'll definitely be no fondness then, Kylie.
No.
But in terms of probably midterm polling, I think probably the biggest poll you had was the Voice referendum, where you could see where Conservative seats were progressive on the Voice, and that might give you as an independent on the hunt for a new seat a chance to kind of peruse the results and find a weak spot in other Liberal seats. And I guess that's why Julian Leese's seat in Berowra is really attractive. Were there other seats that you kind of looked at as well?
Yeah, look, I think what was really interesting about the yes vote is, as you know, Dan, it was fascinating. Every seat held by an independent returned a yes, majority support, maybe only by 51% in the case of McKellar, but it still came in on the yes side. And I think the question that, communities like mine would ask following that is it because of they just had that fundamental belief that it was a good thing, or was it the way that they were already participating in their democracy gave them a sense that they could better understand what was being put forward by the government? So from my perspective, again, I think every seat in this country has the potential to benefit from independent representation, because when I've done the deliberative democracy forums, for example, we've done 2 in our electorate now. On both those occasions, the majority of people in the room had no contact with me, had not voted for me, but were there to discuss a policy issue. And by the end of it, without exception, they left going, that was amazing, I'd do that again. And because I've done it with you once now, I'd vote for you next time. So I think it's the engagement part of politics that we're missing.
Do you honestly think that the independents actively, civically engage their constituents a whole lot more than a member from a regular party?
100%, because people like me go to them saying, we have this problem. What is the solution we can agree by consensus to do? Versus a party approach is, we have this problem and this is what we've decided we've got to convince you is the right solution. So it is a very different way of engaging. So, you know, and I if I can share something, I went up to Ted O'Brien's electorate actually up in Queensland during the year because they were trying to get a community movement started up there. I got to meet with a whole heap of people, and my first question to them was, so tell me, you know, you are represented by Ted O'Brien. How many of you did he ask whether you want him to fight for nuclear energy? Can you put up your hand if you went to Ted and said, we want nuclear energy? No one in the room. And actually, it was one of their biggest criticisms. It's like, here's our local member arguing for nuclear energy, yet is that even what his electorate wants? So I understand there's lots of people that'll say, you know, it's not realistic to have 151 independents in the House. You know, you'd have chaos because everyone would be in it for themselves. But, you know, the first parliament arguably was full of independents, and people with diverse backgrounds get pretty amazing things done all the time. So I'm really hoping we can see more and more deliberative democracy, participatory democracy work in the coming 5 to 10 years.
Well, Kylie, thank you so much. Have you signed your non-compete clause? You won't be allowed to be a member of parliament in any other world's parliaments for at least 5 years.
Well, I know, although, you know, I hear there's this movement called the Republican movement. Maybe I'll just shoot to be first president or something. Maybe
All
that
right.
can be the next step.
It sounds like we've got a lot of options here. We've got President of Australia. We've got Senator, potential Senator for New South Wales, I'm gathering, independent Senator. That is very hard by the numbers to do.
It's very hard, but gosh, it would be historic, wouldn't it, Dan? Like, I think, you know, and something being hard has never been enough to put me off, but it's more about, if being completely honest, the question I have to answer for myself and my kids and my wider family and friends is, how can I have an impact? Like, what's the biggest impact I can have? And it may not be by being at the front of it all. It might be being in the background. But I just know the work here has only just begun, and I feel really committed to making sure we continue to fight for it.
Well, if you get out before 20th of January, I know Donald Trump is hiring for his...
I'm sure he'd consider me for his climate advisor. That would be awesome. Although, did I ever tell you I met Donald Trump once? Did I tell you that?
No, tell me. Where did you meet
him? I was in a bar in New York with a girlfriend. We were dashing to a show and we needed to use the bathroom. So we ducked into this building, up this ramp. It was crowded, and this guy with an earpiece stepped in front of us and he said, "Ladies, can I have your names, please?" And he pulled out this clipboard and he was checking for my name and my friend's name, and obviously we weren't on the list. And so then he went again, "I'm sorry, ladies, can I get your names again?" And then over his shoulder came this voice going, "Ted, let him in. There's no such thing as too many blondes." And it was Donald Trump. And he was opening a new restaurant, and myself and my girlfriend ended up crashing his restaurant opening. So there you go. That's international diplomacy at its best.
Oh, my God, that's it. Well, you know, maybe Kevin Rudd could be swapped out for Kylea Tink as an ambassador.
He just needs to dye his hair blonde and get a better hairpiece.
Just needs a blonde to talk to. And, you know, finally we'll get AUKUS on the rails and make sure we get those goddamn subs that we paid for.
Yeah, I don't think we're going to see them anytime soon, Dan. Or by the time we see them, they'll be unmanned anyway. But maybe the technological exchange will be worth it.
Excellent. And before you go, Kylie, is there anything we could have done better?
Oh, look, that's a whole other discussion, I think, Dan. If you can just circle back, I would encourage, as I said, every Australian consider how you want to turn up and get involved in your politics. But just know, if you go there, it's not like any work environment you've ever experienced. The systems aren't there. The human resource systems aren't there. The job descriptions aren't there. If you're an MP, you don't get annual leave. You don't get sick leave. You know, there's really fundamental things that make it a very unique work environment. So I guess I would encourage, the feedback I would give the system is it needs to get more in line with the rest of the world and come on board. It's our largest employer in the country. It should operate professionally in that way. So maybe we'll see that one day.
Kylie, thanks for joining us for your exit interview, and good luck with whatever seat you wish to take over next.
Always a pleasure, Dan.
A Rational Fear is brought to you by its Patreon supporters. For as little as the price of a cup of coffee, you can get this podcast ad-free, exclusive content, discounts on live tickets, and access to the Discord chat server. Chip in at patreon.com/arationalfear. Or else.